and non-translation and mistranslation to English in the case of comparative literature from their respective positions. So this is the role of translation.
Let me just briefly elaborate on that questions, and then I try to return the question to Professor Azadi. From the institutional thinking perspective you mentioned, you used the term Asian comparative literature, right? Which I really like. And this is the textbook that I used to use when I was teaching like the literary courses to the American college students like 10, 15 years ago. The title is The Contemporary Literature of Asia. And it contains the literature from many different the country in Asia. And the thing is that everything is supposed to be translated into English, right? To be published in this collection. So one of the questions that I want to ask with Professor Azadi is that do you think we need a common ground substantial common ground to bind us together in order to stand on the page of the Asian comparative literature, or just open diversity would be enough to be categorized as a Asian comparative literature? When we combined the Asian and then comparative together, what kind of criteria? Do you need a specific criteria, or we just let it open as much as possible? Anything would be belong to the Asian literature at the same time comparative literature, or do you need first a paradigm to set up the comparative studies? I mean, I hope it's not a too complicated question. Hopefully, it's not my intention to embarrass you. Azadi, please help me out.
Thank you very much for the question. It is a complicated question, but I think in order to move in the direction of discovering a paradigm where we can sort of overcome the divisions, the national divisions. So when you talk about competitive literature in the Korean context, where national departments sort of resist the emergence of comparative literature, the exact same thing exists in Iran. There is no department of comparative literature, and comparative literature has become a kind of a subset of national literature, because Persian is conceived to be a central language, but that's a very false idea. But so I think before thinking of a paradigm, for me, the priority would be to expose those students positioned in national departments who are only familiar with one literary history, or perhaps with European literary history, with similar developments that have happened in Asia. And then at one point, we can expect that maybe that common ground will emerge, or maybe we will just have diversities. So this competitiveness, in order to make comparative literature succeed at its competition with national literary departments, there is no other way but to make those literary histories accessible and available to our students. And then the role of translation here is significant. Whether we like it or not, there are only a few languages that are commonly accessible. We are talking here in English. So we could claim English as the lingua franca for developing this notion of Asian comparative literature, and then let that develop and see what happens. Maybe in future we will have other languages that emerge and can help us communicate, or maybe not, it will stay. But the first thing for me would be this pedagogical idea of expanding the curriculum beyond national literature and beyond what is available in European theory or European languages. So I wonder if I have answered your question even partly. So.
And maybe I have actually quick response or just an observation, just a quick thought that was both inspired by Professor Lee's question and by Professor Omid Azadi's response just now, which is one is I think actually like feminist historians or feminist scholars were looking at, I'm thinking about the work of Tani Balo and a kind of sort of collaboration. I mean, of course, the journal positions Asia critique, but also she's was involved in larger projects that look at emergence of ideas of modern womanhood. So this idea of Nushin or the new woman, which roughly happens around 1920s, when a lot of translation of modern terms from Victorian England and then travel to Japanese kanji and then to also to China around the May 4th period. So that in cinema and in literature, a lot of sort of modern women's writers, some with feminist ideology, sort of emerge around that time. So I'm just wondering, like a particular historical, but also a more transnational approach to the emergence of feminism or new ideologies of gender might also provide a different comparative paradigm. And then another approach that somebody mentions, the work of Xu Meishi, and then I guess her approach, which is inspired by Caribbean thinkers, Glissant, and sort of notions of relations. Or it seems like the relational approach has emerged not only in conflict, but in a lot of other disciplines, right? So comparative, worldly, but also comparative approach that looks at events that happened, say, in the 1960s, like the students' movement in the US, but also the global 60s and decolonization and the non-aligned movement. So, and of course, a lot more other historical forces that might connect writers that we might not think might be connected otherwise, and also tropes and themes of somebody's mentioned earlier about indenture labor and literature of displacement. I think that's definitely a condition of our contemporary moment, but I was also thinking about slavery and indeed indenture labor and coolies. So narrative or contemporary narrative of those moments that might provide another arc of relational comparison. So I wonder if anybody have any thoughts about that, or maybe we can move on to the next questions too. Thank you to our, so I'll raise the next question from the Zoom chat while we all think about these conversation. Thank you to our speakers for their time and such quality time of information. What are the recent trends of research and area of focus of studies in comparative literature? So maybe I actually just answer some of that, but.
I can answer from in Thailand, maybe for question of Akshara Ulas. Okay, that in Thailand right now they use a kind of cultural studies theory. For example, the question of identity, representation, ideology, and then a kind of discourse, like Michel Foucault discourse analysis. Okay, for example, and another trend is about gender studies, about the LGBTQ, okay, not only feminism, and the queer reading or something like that, queer studies, okay. And then we have a kind of the new trend about concentrate on AI and digital culture, new technology, and a kind of eco-criticism, I think start to growing up Okay, and then we look at the non-human perspective, a kind of Anthropocene, in order to, reading for, to take action about climate change. So we have a kind of eco-criticism, and maybe reading from the point of view that is non-human, like AI or something. Okay, so, and maybe rereading the old text in the in the social context of the using the I think cultural studies theory by from Western theory. I think it's in fashion right now. Okay, not only in literature but in cultural studies. Right now we have the cultural studies for the bachelor degree in cultural studies too. So we have the why they call it's a boy love series or something like that. So popular culture will be read in the new dimension on the a kind of cultural theory. Okay. So for comparative literature, we do not concentrate on literary canon that much. So we try to read not try to, but enjoy reading popular culture in the new way. And then those at the borders, for example, you can take a look, like for Chulalongkorn University, you can access all the thesis for the whole file, but in only abstract in English, but most of the content are in Thai. But you can look and find in the digital library of the university if you are interested in. Okay, thank you.
Following the same discussions, may I add something? Yeah. This is gonna be question probably to everyone in the panels. I hope I'm not simplifying here, but I'm definitely from the very old literary traditions. We grew up reading the literatures, enjoying all these storytellings. But for the people like me, like the 2016 Nobel Prize went to the Bob Dylan. That's a little shocking, right? But that definitely demolished the very institutional or very stereotyped the division between literature and music. But the thing is that, as Professor Boonkhachorn just pointed out, as we work with students these days, these students are not from the textual the tradition base. They are definitely coming from the very multimedia, very cultural background. So I don't think that's going to be possible for us to just import or this textual tradition to these young students anymore. And then as I talk to them, they're the point of the interest is usually revolving around the cultural contact point with our lives, right? So that's not a strange thing for the students to have the more serious critical interest in this cultural agenda, cultural discussions, and cultural discursive, obviously. And we try to incorporate the student interest in the area of the comparative literature, but it looks like we end up with cultural studies at the end. So that's gonna be, I'm not sure, that's gonna be another kind of the motivation for the comparative literature, or that's gonna be very critical threat to the future of the comparative literature, because at some point we have to decide whether we want to go with comparative literature or comparative cultural studies. And again, I'm going back to my point. There is another kind of competition between cultural studies and the comparative literature studies. So how do you respond, or how do you perceive this another kind of the competition in your own country?
May I respond to
Yeah,
Hyung-jin?
please. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question because somehow it's also an issue here in the Philippines. I think the distinction of the Philippines is that it's a kind of, society wherein everything that is happening in the United States gets to be zapped in. Gets to be like disseminated easily because the academia here in the Philippines, I would say that the first language is English. So most of us, that's why there is a kind of critique against comparative literature because it becomes like an impediment, an obstacle, an inconvenience, especially in the production of like scholarship. But I think, that's a beautiful question because I just moved from from an institution where there is a degree for literary and cultural studies, and I now with like with the department that has a long history of comparative literature. And usually there is a clash because somehow I think, the fundamental distinction between those who are into comparative literature and cultural studies is that people in comparative literature are strong in literary history in comparison to like cultural studies, which gets to be more of like strong in like critical theory. But I think, the way I see it right now from the vantage point here in the Philippines, I think, to choose between either of the two could be more like destructive rather than protecting like the space of comparative literature. Okay. So I think, there, as I go back to, and I really resonate with the presentation of Professor Mrinmoy in terms of like the solidarity, because somehow I think in the case of like the history of comparative literature here in the Philippines that emerged in the 1960s, and at the same time, it went on by the 70s up to now, is that it has been connected with like, the Cold War history of America in the Asia Pacific. And so like, when he mentioned the war studies, I think that's very, fascinating because somehow comparative literature at one point played a pivotal role in that history. And now when the war is like, disappearing, that, we don't have anymore these like, we don't have anymore the strong support of like, for example, the US embassy. So, that's where like, this is also the time when like comp lit is being questioned in terms of its, potency. But I think another point that, I would like to raise is, now in the Philippines, especially in relation to like translation, because what is strange in the Philippines is most of us speak in English, that, the idea of translation becomes secondary. But right now, with the strengthening of Asia, specifically Southeast Asia, there is a robust production of like translation of like works from Indonesian writers, Thai writers, and other Southeast Asian writers. So I think, which is like fun for me, this event is fortuitous because like there is this kind of turn. And in the last, some of the publications from Penguin Southeast Asia, they are now like works from, Southeast Asian writers that are translated into English by some Filipinos. So like I've seen a lot of Filipinos who are doing this, translation work, this initiative to actually like, foment the dialogue across this region of the world. So maybe the answer to, question like, what should be, I think, more like, the politics of solidarity is, I think, a very, powerful category to translate and to explain and to even defend the discipline of comparative literature.
May I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm completely agree with Professor Hyung-jin. In India also, I have talked to many students and researchers, I mean the postgraduate student and the researchers of comparative literature. And in many cases, they are more interested about cultural studies. And I found they are more interested about cultural studies because they find that they are living with those cultural elements and practices. Like they are observing web series every weekend in their hostel room. So it is their argument, why should I not work on web series? Why should I not work on the modern film or the music, the Bollywood dances and all? So these are the kind of arguments coming from the students, and this is quite threatening for our discipline, and especially the literary study. I mean, in some cases, I find that the literature is secondary study object of inquiry in literature department disciplines itself. So these are the kinds of problem, yeah, of course, we are also facing in India. So that was to share.
I have a question for Professor Trisilpa. May I? Yeah, because I think I remember Professor Trisilpa and I worked before in a we attempted to create a syllabus for ASEAN literature 5 years ago. So we tried to gather a lot of curricular programs for every literature program in Southeast Asia. And I think, in the case of among Southeast Asian nations, Thailand, the Philippines, there's been a long interaction, especially with what, Thailand has, which is the Southeast Asian Writers Award. So my question for Professor Trisilpa is that, was comparative literature, and this is a historical question, was comparative literature pivotal in the organization formation of Sea Writers Award? Did CL play an important role? Because Sea Writers Award is also an important award for a lot of writers in the Philippines. And it just, it does not just grant awards to those who write in English, but also in local languages. So this is my question.
You might have to unmute. You might have, Professor Trisilpa, you might have to unmute.
Professor Trisilpa, you're muted.
Okay. Okay. Continue with the conversation about translation and comparative literature and cultural studies or something. I think that I have one article about the paradigm shift from literary theory to cultural study. So right now we see the literary text as a cultural text. You can look at that because we think that aesthetic, this is not count the CRI award. Huh? We think that evaluation is, depends on who evaluate. So for academic, we think that the aesthetic value that depends, we have to analyze that what kind of values that those people judge or something like that. So right now, I think that literature is a part of culture. So cultural study is a theory that not only literature that use sociology, anthropology, and many, even archaeology, they use cultural study theory too, because it can explain our text, in the deeper meaning that concerning society and people. So for me, I don't mind about the name that you are literature or you are cultural theorists or something. I think we can communicate and we make literature cherish our life. I give you example of our activity last Halloween Day. Halloween Day, we have every department will narrate about literature from about ghosts in their, in their language, specific language. So they enjoy this phenomena like a kind of cultural studies. I think because culture connect us with the real life, not in the text only. So this is only my opinion. As for Jomar question, I think that like Susan Basnet, Susan Basnet, right, from Warwick University. She, the one who wrote a comparative literature as a text. And right now she moved to translation study and have the new department of that. Okay, so I think it's a kind of, actually, the wall of department, I think, from my own experience, I think that actually the faculty, maybe they think about there is no need for department, actually, because we prefer interdisciplinary. When we talk together, we can understand, you know, more concept of other side of discipline. I think so. I think that the wound, let's say the scar that I used to face before the construction of Department of Comparative Literature, that remind me of a kind of division of, you know, a kind of a specific area of study. I think it shouldn't be in this situation, this world of a kind of globalization anymore. I don't know. We had to think that if literature only, our students after graduate, what kind of job that they will receive? Only teacher of literature or something. But if they have a kind of, you know, many discipline, I think it's good for them to you know, to find their own job or something. It is not academic, but I think it's a real life. Okay. As for the C-Right Awards, it's a kind of complex now. Actually, we after I graduate from the state, I said, oh, I will not be in the committee of judgment anymore. Okay, but in Thailand, the situation made me to be in the C-Right Award for more than a decade now, no? Like 2 decades or something. I think that it's good because we have a student that use the C-Right awardee text, like in the Philippines, one will have her article about Filipino writer, and we have the PhD in a comparative study of Singaporean women writers. And Malaysia, we have a student that graduate with the research on woman, Muslim woman, you know, a kind of identity that had to be oppressed by the you know, the both religion and politics, a kind of modern, they call it a modern woman. If you be Muslim woman and you had to work outside home and you had to be a good wife inside your house too, it's a kind of hardship for women. For example, it is from the C-Right awardees works too. So I think this kind of award bring us together to understand each other. I would like to give you experience of not experience, a kind of research of PhD student about Southeast Asia. It's one area that I concentrate in the program. So we have a student that did the research on Cambodian literature, Lao literature, Malaysian literature, Singaporean too, for example. So we can, they try to read from the original language. They try to, but it's very hard, no? So maybe sometimes must use the translation. So I think if we can have a chance to talk together like this, like Professor Mrinmoy talk about many points, those many points can be the student research very easily. You can pick up, like student here, you can listen to your professor and then you pick up that there are many interesting points. So the ideology that the Philippines try to do, the text of Southeast Asian literature, I think it's very good, but it's quite difficult because the problem is because of translation, right? Translation, the artistic work. So sometimes we translate and it's not, the quality is not that good. But the challenge is that now we have the AI that can translate. the challenge is that maybe AI can compose poetry better than human being. So don't worry that much about translation. But I think the idea that the Philippines initiate, I think we should have a kind of continuation. Maybe Professor Jo Ma can continue and try to finish it. I think right now we can communicate better than before, yeah? Because of this kind of Zoom or something like that, we have a kind of seminar or conference or meeting very easily. Mm-hmm.
I think we might be able to continue this conversation for hours because this is such a nice group, and then so many fascinating ideas about how to reconceive conflict emerges in our conversation. But I would like to turn things over back to my colleague, Dr. Daniel Elam, for any final thoughts and to close the event properly.
I mean, it attests to the kind of the vibrancy of this conversation. That there's still questions and there's still comments, and some of the questions that were raised just now opened up more questions. And so I'm really excited to keep this conversation going. We're out of time today, but I think there's going to be more opportunities to have further conversations and to track these questions down. I think they're kind of really valuable. I just want to really once more thank Dr. Pramanick for his putting us together and putting this, beginning this conversation. I think it's a fantastic conversation, and it's all because of Dr. Pramanick's organization and vision for this. So thank you once more. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. Thank you to the panelists for your really excellent output, presentations and conversation points. I think there's a lot to think about. My notes are quite long, so I look forward to continuing the conversation in due course. Thank you.